If you're vulnerable to psychic damage from roguish language, stay away from these gibbering mouths. But if you intend on listening to this podcast about enriching your fantastical group hallucinations, you're too far gone already.
Your next game is going to be intriguingly dynamic, and here's why. In this episode, we find some answers to how can scene structure help us pace our games better?
And what tips from the life of a filmmaker turned GM can we use to improve our games?
And what is ready to roll, and why is it so damn good? Welcome to the Hook and Chance podcast. I'm Travis.
And I'm his brother Jordan.
So today we're talking about pacing.
Right. So, you ever hit this particular wall? The party just finished negotiating the terms of their next quest, and now they're standing around in the room, and as they all begin to entertain themselves by making small talk with a guard, you realize that they've now got to get to the mountaintop. As you're figuring out where they could go next, you're also trying to play out Jard the guard, who the party is now inviting on the quest, and you panic. You say yes, and you smash cut to the stables? I don't know. They need horses, right?
Yeah, I want to know a little bit more about Jard the guard.
And that's the problem. He's not fleshed out.
Oh, the
Don't
pacing.
focus on Jard.
Yeah. And like, this is all well and good from a at home, you can fumble, you can mess up, you don't have a lot on the line in terms of stakes. But there are other people that have honed this into a fine craft.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine if you're not just pacing things for your group, but for a large audience of your high production actual play video series. You're going to have to get good real quick.
And not just like, you think about the kind of stuff that could potentially be on your shoulders. Sets. Every time you mention a set, a new place, you're thinking, oh, okay, that's just now a new thing in the world. But in the case of some people's experience, it means that there is a new set that actually has to be built and created and crafted by craftspeople. And if you describe a weapon, holy shit, that weapon now has to be built. Well, that's kinda in the vein of our guest today.
Right. So she's the game master for the incredible actual play YouTube series Ready to Roll, which was created by a Filthy Lot Productions. That's a content creation studio in Vancouver, BC, packed with professionals from the film industry. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this project later, but she's killing it as the DM.
Yeah, we tend to resonate with fine folks that have a lot of varied background experience that, for us, this has always helped us develop really rich and interesting worlds. And I think this is one of those things that we have in common with the very multi-talented and diverse experience that Roz brings to the table.
Like publishing scientific papers in microbiology and biotechnology.
She's been a research assistant studying video games for rehabilitation.
She's produced several short films and series.
From screenwriting and post-production for Netflix and Disney, like, there's a lot of film experience there too.
And she even plays the French horn. And yes, this is going to come up in our conversation around pacing. So stick around for that.
This is kind of a wonderful mix of science and storytelling and movies and all of the cool things that we really love. And that's why we're super excited to talk to Roz Young today. Thank you very much for joining us, Roz.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for inviting me. What a delight.
We asked you to join us to talk about pacing.
But before we get into all the ways that we can be good at it, can you remember ever struggling with it in a game, or did your experience negate that right out of the gate? Were you always good at it?
Just born with it.
Well, I think a little bit because of my experience, I think naturally in an environment that leans itself towards encouraging strong pacing. But I've definitely been in games where I feel we're going in circles, or one character is getting their moment, but everyone else is bored. Those times where you can tell that the feel of the game has turned into something that, wasn't what I'd intended, wasn't what I know my players and I had talked about as what we would feel like we want in a game. And it does seem to be that it derails for a bunch of reasons, but in general, getting back on track when you start to lose people gets a little bit tricky. And it all depends, again, on the very beginning thing of talking to your players about what do you guys want to achieve? Like, what's the feel of a day? What does good look like? When you have a session and at the end of it that you're super jazzed or you're super pumped about it, and you go out and the first thing that you do is tell everybody who will even stare at you for a second everything that happened in your last game. So if, like, what are you going for with your team? And when you guys agree to something that feels good, I've been in moments where I was like, oh, I know this isn't what we wanted. People are not feeling it. They're confused. And my biggest one is that I love puzzles. I love puzzles a lot. And my player groups vary. I just know that sometimes you have to adjust the way that, I would like a scene or a moment to go, because I know what's happening on the other end. And that one is probably my biggest one. And I always have a way out with the puzzle, because I'll have thought it was straightforward, or that I laid all these clues out, and I'll just be patting myself on the back about how good that's gonna go. And then that trap will trigger, and then there'll be that piece of information they're gonna remember from 2 weeks ago. And instead it's always give yourself an out, because they're gonna be confused and they're gonna get cranky, and then they're gone. Their chance to role play is also gone too, because they're pulled out of the moment.
And then the DM has to take on the role of the many crickets in the room that are just waiting for people to. All right.
You can do it.
Yep.
So you're always trying to sneak in puzzles to your games, is what you're saying. That's Roz's
Oh yeah.
goal.
If I could sneak a puzzle in every day and not have them catch on and hate me forever, I think that would be a dream. But I also understand that there's what the characters can be capable of, and then what your players are capable of, and learning the hard way. Put your foot in your mouth and accidentally give the dyslexic player the math puzzle, and they get really stressed out, and then they're not having fun either. And you're like, I could have learned that.
Right. And like you said, actually talking to your players, that advice never gets old. Get on the same page before you start playing, and wonderful things will happen.
Yeah, and it's okay to check in while you go too.
I feel like we missed a real golden opportunity, because Jordan and I stumbled through a series of episodes on puzzles. So we're going to have to retcon those episodes and bring you back for some more puzzles. But I think to kind of dive into the whole reason we're here is to really talk about what you've already kind of alluded to, which is that pacing and kind of keeping people on their toes and engaged and feeling the energy in the space. And we'll do that in the Strategy Stateroom.
This is the Strategy Stateroom, where inventive and cunning tactics are crafted for when they're needed most.
Well, Roz, when we originally talked to you about pacing, to simplify what you were saying the most, you kind of had 2 steps that you gave us, which was think in acts and think in scenes. And I think we can start broadly and talk about that thinking in acts. Can you tell us what you mean by that and how it helps you to pace your games?
Yeah, I think in acts, because I have a background in screenwriting. And when you first learn to screenwrite and start analyzing stories, particularly stories in film and television, but when you start to work on looking at things through that lens, you see there's a natural flow to a story. So stories have beginning, middles, and ends, but then they have these other key moments that an act will be known for. So the act 1 of a movie needs to set up and do some work for your story that sets up this progress. That's a really natural journey, and everybody's familiar with the hero's journey, and Star Wars is the good example, but there's other act structures out there. And I think when you start by thinking in acts, when you start writing what you have planned for your one shot or your campaign, you'll naturally build in a sense of pace, because you will have a destination in mind that hits these other milestones along the way. So it's not just the beginning where we're going to have an intro. and we meet in the tavern, and then the end where we have a big bad boss fight or some other reveal of information and towards a conclusion, but you build in some progression points along the way that everybody who's DMing, you're naturally doing this. Probably you're setting yourself up for these milestones, but you can use some of this act structure from film to help guide you to those milestones. So one of the really good ones is at the end of Act 2, it's this all is lost moment. And so you want your players to have a time where they don't think they're going to be able to succeed, because that makes the succession at the end, like the huge moment where you get to cheer and hopefully not TPK and everybody dies, but you're headed towards this moment. It's just an innate human nature that we want to be scared and nervous, and the anxiety builds, and all of that leads towards this epic heroic moment, if that's what you think your players are going for. Maybe you're running an evil campaign and they're going to kill all these people and it's going to be really dark, but even in that case, they have to have their moment to accomplish this task that you set them out on at the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's one of my favorite beats in storytelling, actually, is that all is lost moment. And I think, it works really well in movies and TV, but I'm curious, from your perspective, it's kind of tricky sometimes to set up. Do you have any specific advice on how to set up that moment?
I think it's finding the time that the players also do that for you. So that moment that they said they'd never split up and they do. And then you can spring something on them that they knew that they shouldn't do this, and they made that choice for whatever reason. They had to balance some scenarios and they decided to go this way over this way. And then you challenge them, and finding the players, especially towards those moments, who were, if they're up for it, maybe they've been quieter. Maybe they haven't participated, or you haven't touched on their backstory yet. Then you can pull all those moments into something where in combat you have a really good chance, because you're probably going to be able to drop somebody, and then maybe pull in some information and give them a juicy role play moment. And then some character beat is going to have to pull them, and the players have to make that choice, because the next step in the act structure, after you've gone through this all is lost moment, the road home is preceded by some sort of decision, a character change. And so you're waiting for your players to go on that journey, and you can try to help manufacture it with them, but there's usually a player somewhere in there who's got something juicy that you could give them a moment. And then you can use that with your pacing tips to, start things moving faster, increase the pressure on them. They could head towards something now that is get everybody back together. And suddenly you're on this journey that's going to feel really epic all together again.
Do you have any kind of go-tos that, the old handy tricks that you rely on to increase pressure for your players? I think that's pretty key to trying to get towards that all is lost moment.
Without overwhelming completely, because there is kind of a balance when you're DMing, right? It's not like you can tell the story exactly how you want to tell it. You have to keep that energy at the right place.
Yeah, sometimes it's really tricky, because you have to let them have a moment where they can't rely on just naturally rolling okay to get by. It's, this roll isn't enough to succeed. And the best super sneaky DM tip is, when they say something that they think is important, or they're having a moment, but they don't know why, but you just roll. Just roll. Don't tell them what you're rolling for. Don't tell them the outcome. Don't tell them why. And their anxiety levels will shoot up. They'll all get really nervous, and they'll be like, what's happening? What's going on? Have we made a change? Did something change in the game? And that will cause them to all start thinking really fast. Also, it's fun. But when you're doing it, you'll see the players they'll immediately all come back to you. So if you're starting to lose them, they notice when you roll all the time.
You're evil, Roz. That is great.
A little attention grabber.
But the big problem there is the risky part of I'll make it so your stuff isn't going according to what they might have planned, or their roles are not succeeding, and they might start to get frustrated. And so you have to still give them something else, which is usually the way out. But they have to feel like they earned it, or it won't feel good.
We recently had a Discord folk who called us out very playfully on the fact that we've talked about 5-act structures and 7-act structures and 8-act structures. And they said, you guys figure your shit out, decide on one so
Which
that
one
we
of
can,
these
which one
works?
of these works, which is canon. But obviously, as you kind of pointed out, there's lots of different ways to structure your story. Do you have any one of those structures, like the 3, 5, 7, that you find work better for different types of games or different sections of your game?
I think I tend to follow it in triples. My favorite general story trend is laugh, cry, cheer. It's just always this sort of motion that I'm going through. I'm a pretty whimsical DM. I'm really about the rule of fun. I like to have a good time at my table, but I'm not going to have a cheer moment if we don't have a stressful, all is lost cry moment. So we don't always literally cry, but we do get to the point where there is concern that, maybe the players won't make it, or they won't achieve their quest, or they lose something along the way. And whether that's an item they'd collected or a pet they tried to keep, those sorts of things that you can kind of incorporate into the story makes that cheer moment at the end that much stronger. So I'll often build things in a simple kind of 3-act structure pattern all along the way, and then that one is part of a larger introduction, middle, end, and then part of an even larger introduction, middle, end, and all of those things at the end of those acts, they're act breaks that should change the story in another direction. So if we get to the end of a mini plot in the town, then maybe suddenly the information that they had leads them on a totally different path, or they realize they've been misled and now they want to go back to another part of the story, but it has to follow into another one of these patterns. Television that's in like a 1 hour procedural type, which is a good model, tends to do a 5-act structure, which is another great option. And I think it just depends on, sometimes it's how many extra things and other NPCs and characters you're building into your story. How many other subplots are there that you still need to resolve? Otherwise, that also feels really unsatisfying if there's just NPCs and side quests everywhere and they never get a chance to get resolution. They never have a moment where they can feel that they've accomplished something. Then that also starts to feel, and then you notice you lose your players because they're not going to talk to one more guy on the street.
If they know that it's not necessarily going to pay off in the long run, then it's really hard to get them invested in the next NPC. So yeah, getting into that habit of making sure that you pay off even some of the simplest NPCs in a small way. The little crying boy in town got his bike back, or whatever the case may be. But going back to the act structures, I'm not sure I've ever heard it put so succinctly, the 3-act structure of laugh, cry, cheer, but that is so perfectly.
Yeah, I'm carving that into the wall. I'm putting that on my DM screen. That's really good. That's like something I can, in my DM panic moments, I can remember and just be like, oh yeah, what emotion am I trying to hit? I love that. Go on though, Trev.
Well, but that is to say exactly that, of it's something that I think is incredibly useful and a lot easier to remember than, say, Jordan and I are big fans of, we've got like an 8-act structure that I often use that is, it requires an Excel spreadsheet to work out exactly how I want the story to go. And that's fine for thinking in that kind of campaign scale, when you can sit down and, tap a pen against your forehead and really think your way through a campaign. But laugh, cry, cheer is something that I can stay on even within a session, or like you said, it can just be extrapolated infinitely.
Yeah, and sometimes it's fun if you play with this, as people get to know you, you can mix that up too, because people get to know that, I'll usually have a really silly intro to a moment and getting to know everybody. And I like to do scenarios as the players get to know each other where laughter really breaks the ice, so that's really easy. But if my players know me really well, I could start with cry. Like I could mix that up and they're all of a sudden into some super dramatic moment right out the gate. And maybe they're at the end of a battle and they're scouring the battlefield and it's just dead bodies, and there's people they knew there, and then you can throw them into that moment, and then you have to give them the relief, so they're going to have to laugh after that. And then can we get back into a format again where we can be on a pacing system where the emotions that the players are experiencing are changing, because I think that's when they're going to have a great fun time.
Yeah, and it's easy to get into that as a DM of your usual routine. So that's a good reminder to mix it up. But I think kind of moving on to, like, you have a lot of thoughts around scenes. Kind of take us through, maybe starting with the difference between the way you're thinking of acts and the way you're thinking of scenes when you're planning out, say, a game of D&D.
Yeah, I think of it really, my sessions much like my scripts. And so I have an act, it's a series of scenes where there's a goal with a set of milestones through there. And those scenes could play out however the players decide those moments do, but they still are fitting into what needs to be accomplished by the end of the act. So by the end of this moment, I'm hoping that we've gotten to this point. I'm trying to hit a couple of emotional beats or information deliveries, and the scenes are the opportunities for the players to interact in each of the spaces. So I'm hoping that this scene takes place in, the dungeon, but I don't know for sure that it will. So letting the players still make those choices that lead them somewhere, but I have a piece of information to deliver or breadcrumb clues that they're going to find in a space, but you're kind of working on the fly to make sure that this part's still going to happen, or it's a scene between two players. And so if I know that today is a day where we're going to get some backstory information about this player, I anticipate that this other player is going to find that really interesting or particularly juicy, or it messes with their stuff. And so I know I need to set up a space for them to have that scene together. And sometimes it's funny to be able to, force them into a closet arguing about it. And sometimes, maybe they're yelling across the whole street at each other in the middle of a brawl, but they have an opportunity to have that scene between them. So they're smaller, a little bit more personal, but they also have hopefully kind of a beginning, middle, and end, because I think of that in such a storytelling visual way, translating it from film.
Interesting. I see the power in that, like taking two characters and kind of giving them a moment. How do you get them there? Because, I mean, often the party's together. People aren't always running away from each other. So how do you give it that highlight on purpose?
Some of it's through tools where you talk to your players individually. On Ready to Roll, we use Slack. So I can send players messages. So if one piece of information is revealed to somebody, I can send a message through the Slack that's like, reminder, this is connected to your backstory. This is the same name that you heard when you had that letter that you received a while ago. Because they're going to be like, oh, I totally forgot it there. And that'll nudge them to maybe force them into the moment where they're like, I have a thing to say about that.
That's great. Yeah. They can act on it. Wonderful.
Yeah, but they also sometimes they just pick up. If they don't pick up on it, nudging them. But if they do, give them the chance first to try on their own.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's really powerful in the sense that, we often feel as DMs these like Machiavellian puppet masters in the background that we can do this kind of stuff. But for some reason, when it comes to prompting players on maybe what's connected to their backstory or maybe what's a little bit more relevant, we feel like maybe that's stealing from their, I'm not going to give you any notes. I'm not going to remind you of any notes. You have to take all the notes for your session. I'm not going to feed you any information. I'm backing out. I never quite understood that barrier of why we can't, as DMs, since we're doing the rest of the pulling the strings, why can't we just remind folks of, hey, by the way, this person was so-and-so, without stealing their joy?
Mm-hmm. I get that. Oh, that's a good expression. Oh my goodness. And sometimes it's unique to the players too. Some players really appreciate the nudge. Some players are not as into it. And so you have to, what works for each person. But I have a crew that's pretty dedicated to, they really appreciate those. I have one player who refuses to take notes ever. And probably wouldn't check Slack even if I tried. So I'll often be a little bit more like, hey, buddy, that's that thing you said that you were into. But most of the time it's nice to do it a little bit more subtly so that they have a chance to figure their moment in organically through roleplay, so that I have to talk a bit less in a moment where maybe the players can do it all through their own interactions as their character.
Well, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you're still giving them so much control over how this is going to play out. And I think that's what you're alluding to, Travis, is just we're worried as the DM that the players will think that's stealing all of their autonomy. But It's just giving them information. It's okay to do that.
You mentioned think of pacing like volume. Can you extrapolate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think pieces of music have act structure too, right? They have rising motion and they're leading you on their own journey. So music is a story, just like our D&D sessions are stories. And human beings want to go on a quest together and arrive at some destination where we all have an emotional connection to the experience. And I love classical music and I play French horn and I have for a long time since I was a kid and then in the university band. And I think that there's really something strong about thinking of your own DM style a little bit like you're on a musical journey. And you can give your players the clues about the pace and the pace that you're trying to set or change by doing some of those things that we can take from music. So get really quiet. It'll draw people in. Speak in shorter sentences that listen. Then when you want to get really loud and if you want to talk a lot, you can give a lot of information and it's going to change the way the players are feeling and the stress level will start to go up and your sentences get longer and they run on. And then you have a moment where suddenly you can give them release. And so I like to work on it. I'm not great, but I like using my voice like an instrument. And I think that that helps to draw the players back into the moment. They listen and they naturally, we all, when we listen to music, I think we lean in and we sway. And it's just such a human experience. And so we're so trained by just what we listen to that you can use some of those tools when you're DMing if you need to, especially change the pace of your game.
That's a powerful tool that I don't think gets talked about in any tabletop role playing stuff that I've seen. Like the power of our voice and our emotional rhythm that we're putting off. Wow.
I'm sure that can be a barrier for a lot of DMs in that, there are some DMs who don't kind of come at D&D from a theatrical standpoint, but it is inherently kind of theatrical in the way that we're putting ourselves behind a screen and we're starting to, just that very act is somewhat theatrical. So I wonder if that's kind of a call to myself as a DM and I think a lot of DMs everywhere of saying, okay, now we're going to lean in a little bit. And like you said, use your voice like an instrument, start conducting your games like a conductor. Like there's a lot of parallels I can see to kind of that music of like, okay, now we've got the crescendo and now we've got a solo. I need you to take it away now. That kind of thing. It is a very kind of performative musical experience now that I think about it.
I love there's a meme going around right now that is, do you want to get better at drawing sorcerers than just use conductors? Because they're so expressive. There's so much emotion on their face and they have a wand. So, that they're big, but I don't think that very many people feel like they are overshadowing the music by being theatrical themselves. And if you've had a conductor who is into the music, that just makes the experience as a player when I'm in the band playing for somebody who's really passionate at the front, I start to do that myself too. And then what the hope is that the experience for everybody else around you in that moment, that they are on that same invested journey with you. But I do feel like you have to be careful as a DM. It is about the players, obviously, making sure that you never make it too much about yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. You're not going to go full conductor mode on them. But yeah, you're just making me think about the fact that, more nervous DMs. And when I started, I was certainly in this camp. I had the tendency to kind of wait for somebody else to be the energetic one rather than lead that. And it's certainly something to practice, but to be aware of how much an effect that has, I think is way more powerful than what I did, was just sitting back, hoping for the best and being meek about it. Okay, anybody do anything cool in this scene?
And some of that is how you like to DM and what your table's into. Because I think if you have a lot of players who are shy and prefer to, that they're working on, and if they want to, if they're wanting to be more engaged, and they're working on it, they probably will feel intimidated by somebody who comes at it. Sometimes I come in real hot and spicy and I'm really like energy first and I'm a little wild and crazy. And I had games with a couple of players who were really new and weren't very confident, and they wanted to be there every session, but it took a really long time to pull them out of their shell. And that became, because I usually stand when I DM because I'm alarms all over the place and I'm talking and that became an opportunity for me to also sit back a little bit. The big problem there is you have to talk to the other players at the table, because as soon as you build someone a space, it's a vacuum, and other players who are naturally really loud or passionate about their character will fill that void that you leave. But you're being clear that I'm leaving this space for somebody in particular. So sometimes you have to separate that player out or kill everyone else for a little bit and give them the chance to move into that space and take ownership of their role play moment.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. You're the last person that I'm targeting with this sleep spell. Everyone else is asleep. What do you do?
I've had a player suddenly step into a moment like that who had sat on the sidelines for so long. And I had probably one of my proudest moments of a player just like suddenly used spells she'd never used before, got herself out of this crazy jam. And in the end, they survived this dragon fight because of her. And she had been the quiet sidelines, happy to just, be the player who waits outside. Literally, she would have her character just wait outside the door.
It's safe out here.
Yeah, exactly.
I've had those moments too where that shyer person finally gets a chance. And I swear that's the most emotional moment I've ever seen at tables, is when they get to do what they've been waiting to do, but everyone just talks so much.
I think that's great advice of just, here's your opportunity for a solo. Now run with it. And if not, then we'll get back and we'll pull everyone back in and we'll carry on.
Relating to the solos, I think I had a screenwriting instructor once tell me that in the scripts that she really enjoys, she has a little rule that everybody gets a speech, and it's the same as that solo moment. And so you're trying to find an opportunity for everybody to have a moment at some point in your campaign.
You also talk about keeping secrets in the way to keep people hanging on the hook and keep people leaning in and keeping the pacing going. You say keep secrets and leave trails. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's maybe with my puzzle brain, it's sort of the way I think about the reveal of information is as a puzzle to solve. So I want to make sure that, every DM has to have all your ways out. You know that you need to leave. If you want them to figure something out, you need way more clues or opportunities than the one or two that might lead them there. But they might miss that or misinterpret it or not go to the place where it could make sense for them to get that info, and you can't squeeze it in anywhere else. So you need more breadcrumbs than the loaf was made of in order to actually get them there.
I like that.
But you also want to keep some things from them. Sometimes it's for your back pocket so you could pull it out later. It's also about the pacing so that you don't give all of the information away in the beginning. And they also give your players a chance to be smarter than you, because sometimes they'll put together the clues and you'll be like, oh dang, that's really good, that's so much better than what I had planned, oh no. Okay, and then but now because I haven't revealed everything, I can adjust, change my plan, incorporate their stuff so they feel really smart, which they love. Then I can get going again on my crumbs. But they've figured out something that was probably often better than I had planned. They're so smart and clever.
Isn't that usually the way? And then somehow, in some weird way, they get to infer it back onto you by saying, wow, you were 2 steps ahead of me. I can't believe I figured it out. I can't believe you planned for that. That's incredible. Like you come across like some kind of fortune teller or seer in being able to see the path that they took when really you were just kind of incorporating what they had thrown out.
It's why I love D&D more than screenwriting and doing traditional film or television work, because this is collaborative storytelling. We are all building this story together. It's not the story I wrote on a piece of paper or in my extensive Google Sheets, or if you're doing spreadsheets work. All of those documents are living documents. Everything's going to change as soon as your players are loose in the world, and they are writing the story with you. And it's so fun. And yeah, in the end, it's probably way better than you would have done solo if you were just writing it as a novel. Well, to me, I like it.
No, I think you settled it. I think that was a hard stance, and you were right to take it. That D&D is better than movies or TV, hands down.
Yep.
Because there's no way that anyone at the start of a campaign knows what's going to happen at the end of it. It's so magical. Like at the end of each session, talking about those big spreadsheets, at the end of every session of any campaign that I've run, I just sit down and say, okay, scratch all that I thought maybe would happen, and let's rewrite the rest from here. Let's start from scratch.
I was giving some players some hags to fight, and as they were figuring out what it was going to be, in one of my last campaigns, it was pretty clear about halfway through that they were not going to try to kill them. They were going to try to save them, and it changed everything about what I had planned. And so I was just in a quick spend a couple moments to figure out how can I change right now in the moment so that that's still an option for them, because I hadn't really thought about it. And then over time having to adjust the plan along with them to run a story that's the story they wanted. They wanted to save them, or some of them, or try. And it was on me as the DM to give them that as a choice and try to make that even available, even if it's really hard to do. That is the story that they wanted to participate in, and not just go to the end and kill a bunch of things and save the world.
That's so cool that you have players that take those kind of options too, because I think that that's a really kind of great gauntlet to throw down to players as well, is think about trying to do the hard thing before trying to do the easy thing. And like when you lay out this scenario where players are thinking, can we save the hags? Can we do this? You have laugh, cry, and cheer built into that scenario of, yeah, we can save a couple of the hags, but we're not going to end up saving one. And now we've got a little bit of a cry. We've got a moment of levity after or before, and now we get to cheer because we managed to do it, or the hags gave us some amazing boon, or something like that. Like that's really cool when players kind of see that opportunity in front of them and take it.
Yeah, and they're used to playing in my stories where I often have NPCs who give up when their hit points are really low. They don't want to die, which I think is completely reasonable.
Seems fair.
And what's in it for them? So really thinking about especially the NPCs that are sentient and, have backstories and families and goals and dreams. And those NPCs, maybe it's not worth it for them all the time. Sometimes they're literally willing to die for this cause, and a lot of times they're not, because why would they? So they try to give up, and my players are pretty used to there being maybe something more going on, and they want to talk to them about it and find out what is going on for this NPC. They probably have information, or they just have a really cool, interesting backstory, even if they're a total piece of shit. Like, let's just ask this guy some questions. What's going on in your life, man? Why are you such a jerk?
What happened to you?
Right.
How do you approach ending sessions and like kind of these scenes? We're talking about acts. How do you wrap all of that up in a way that keeps players? Because I think this is something that plagues DMs a lot, which is how do we keep them hungry for the next session? How do we make sure that whatever social engagement seems not as important as figuring out what the hell we're doing in the next session of D&D?
Yeah, I love cliffhangers. They are my favorite tool. Something, again, that comes a lot from screenwriting. But I think when you have an act break, I had a good note from an instructor once to think of them as actual breaks. They're going to break your heart. So something really tragic that's going to cause all sorts of emotional moments for everybody. You're going to break your leg. This is the moment of the monster shows up. Everybody roll initiative. I'll see you next week. And then break the case. And that's the big clue drop. That is, you receive this, there's a bag of holding, and you open it up and it's full of clues. I'll email you guys some of that information, but when you come back next week, we'll put them together and I'll literally bring pieces of paper for you. So the cliffhanger is always a promise, but you're going to go in one of these two directions, and either way, things are different now.
That's
Ooh,
awesome.
I think that just unlocks something for me. The fact that like things will change. You can't go back to the way things were at the start of the next session.
Yeah, I like that about pacing is change. I have to promise my players that it won't be the same.
And
Wow.
those three also, very much help sort out the jumble of cliffhangers that I think exist in my brain into three categories. So thank you for that too. Like that kind of hits all the bases. Like leave them just curious as to what their character is going to do next is super powerful with that break the case. I love those moments. Those like, oh, the mystery, we're going to unravel it. We just unraveled it, but now what?
Yeah, that's my puzzle brain too. I just love giving out those clues right at the end.
I think that really helps Jordan and I with a lot of the stuff that we tend to struggle with, from pacing and which act structure is the best.
What to keep in mind when I'm panicking and sweating and don't know what to do next. I like those little unlocks.
And how to end a session. To maybe move along, we need to figure out the puzzle and the mystery of Roz and what she's working on. So we're going to hop over to the hero stage to do exactly that.
This is the hero stage, where fantastic folk have a spotlight turned to them to tell the tales of their adventurous lives.
Let's talk about Ready to Roll, which is one of the most impressive D&D endeavors I think I've ever seen, because what a beautiful mountain of work to put together what you have done. And I guess to shorten it, I think Ready to Roll is one of those endeavors that every single player or DM has dreamed of at some point in their lives. You know, they think, God, wouldn't this be cool if it were live action? And you guys did it. That's
Oh my goodness, we did. It's crazy. And it absolutely is, I mean, a dream. And to have these friends who were starting a company and wanting to make online content, knowing that I was a DM and we'd worked together in film before, and I was finishing up a job, I was working in post-production, and they were starting up, and they said, come and be a DM, and we're going to play this game. And then we're going to actually pull scenes from it and reenact them with full makeup, hair, costumes, set builds. We're going to do it all like we all know how to do and we're all experts at. We're going to film this. You know, we were like, how good can we do this? And we said, well, let's find out. And I at first didn't know that a reenacted scene would just fall into the gameplay, because that's the idea behind the show. We haven't pulled that off entirely. We've just started releasing gameplay, and now we're releasing what we call them as the vignettes, these short clips out of the episode where it starts with the gameplay moment and then it just transitions into the high production value reenactment. And I love it. I can't believe how good it turned out. It's just such a joy. And it's like Drunk History. Players are mouthing along in their character costumes and makeup to their own words. And then our fellow coworkers are all dressed up as the NPCs that are still mouthing along to my stupid words. And I love it so much. And it's so lovely. When you see the first one that's out with our costume designer, Ash, she plays Hammerlane, this dwarf wizard, and she's in all the makeup and huge amounts of prosthetics and this beautiful wig and the costume that she built for the character. She's wearing it. But then she turned all those moments where I flubbed something into like a little burp because the dwarf's been drinking, and all these little character beats. And they're so subtle, but so beautiful. It's funny what a joy it is to watch. And I just hope that the people who go on that journey with us feel the way that we do, which is so proud and thrilled.
We love what you have done as well. It's brilliant. Like we've already said many times, I cannot imagine how much work goes into that. Can you kind of walk us through like all of the stages, what it takes to produce an episode, just so that I think someone can get a really good sense of how incredible this is?
Because it's very hard for us to express how much, like, they're not skimping Dear listener, this is serious. This is like above and beyond what you're picturing now from what you've heard so far. I promise you, it's more than that.
Yeah. Even gameplay itself is cinematic. They are filmed on a set we built, which is set to feel like sort of a castle, and with a big table also built by the team to play D&D on. And in the walls are all clues about the characters' backstories. So someone's banner, someone's shield, some apple cores are sprinkled throughout because that happens in a scene at one point. And so all of these elements just for the gameplay, and then the windows along the sides of this castle room that built to play in are actually glass, and there's cameras on the other side. So, like 6 or 7 cameras with operators who would get very tired because you play D&D for a long time. that footage all goes to the editorial team. So the guy playing Seno, my partner Matt, he is the editor. So putting together the footage from all of those cameras into one 1-hour episode of gameplay. The original goal for the show, which we couldn't quite achieve, but we're going to release what we can that we've already shot, was that an hour worth of this gameplay would have 15 minutes of reenactment sprinkled in throughout an hour. So for the first one, which is from episode 5, where they meet Hammerlane, the dwarf leader of this town, there's a 20-minute section that was an example of what we were trying to do. But in order to create that, we built the set, which was Hammerlane's office and the hallway in front of it, all in the same warehouse space that we had built the original gameplay set. So the gameplay circle space is the same as Hammerlane's office.
Oh, wow.
And then we built the one hallway out. So when you see them, you can be like, oh, they've just changed what's on the walls. But what's on the walls includes an owlbear painting completely from scratch done by one of our art team members. And they built most of the miniatures, and we have in our props team leather maps, like real leather maps that come out to the gameplay table, and some of those are hanging in the wall. They did paintings, and they found like classical paintings, but then changed their skin color and their ears. So, you can have lovely orcs on the walls or elves. And all of those elements, some of them were rentals from the prop shops around town. Some of them were things we built. The books in Hammerlane's office are just fake covers just to put up on all of her bookshelves. But that's just the set, again, with all of our camera crew and lighting. And then each of the players has a full functional costume. So we have one person on our costumes team who specializes in leatherworking, building all the leather pieces. Someone else who can do metal work to actually have functional pieces. And lots of it's like cosplay style as well, so that, it's light enough. Our paladin, for example, I think Bev's like stretched out as tall as she can reach on tippy toes, 5'3". So giving her an outfit that worked for her, but it was still pretty heavy, and she's carrying around a sword and a set of javelins and her tools and her shield, and all of that started with design by the players. So this is what I imagine my character is literally wearing most of the time. And then the stuff that you don't see even. So Bev has a huge burn scar on her chest that you just never see in this season because we don't have that opportunity to ever see her without her mail on. And she designed that, and the makeup team built the prosthetic, so she is wearing that burn to feel like that character the whole time. And then, yeah, in makeup, they have a whole team of people, prosthetics. Ash is wearing, as Hammerlane, a fake nose, chin, cheek pieces, ears. Her hands have aging prosthetics, and the wig, just incredible. And the characters are wearing stuff to make them look completely fantastical. So we have a half orc in the party, and that was probably like a 5 hours of makeup application.
That's incredible.
To be able to create it. It's so wild. But then we go into post-production too. So to finish the content, we have one guy doing sound, and eventually someone else from our PA team started working with him, so we could have somebody cleaning up the dialogue at the same time, because we got a lot of crosstalk at our table. It was all agreed ahead of time that we knew we were going to do this, so occasionally I get notes from people that are like, oh, you shush your players a lot, it's just not very cool. I was like, well, we all talked ahead of time that we knew we would shoot reenactments. And so trying to minimize how much we talk over each other.
Yeah.
But, when it's fun, you can't help it. You're having a good time. We still wanted to make sure that D&D gameplay, fun, honest, genuine gameplay was at the heart of this story. So that had to come first. But then everybody knows that, you're talking over somebody about something anachronistic and modern. It's going to feel weird when you're all dressed up like elves and dwarves. You want to keep that to a minimum.
Fair enough. As far as the world and the setting that this time kind of takes place in, this was your own creation. What's unique about Altero, and give us a quick pitch on what makes it so unique and cool.
The really short version of that is that it is a high fantasy world, but with portals. So across Altero, spherical world and mostly water and has magic, and the portals link parts of Altero to each other. But this is Altero not, and there are portals that link Altero not and Altero prime. And that's so that in the future, Matt and I could run games that are more science fiction. And those portals are extremely rare to the other world, and they're controlled primarily by one country, and they have a queen, and she is attempting to use the science from the other world, and so she keeps it very proprietary to her, and they try not to share too much magic in the other direction either, so that someday they wouldn't be forced to surrender should somebody master all of their stuff and come through. So it's a fun way to have the potential to do other kinds of storytelling and maybe even other game mechanics on the other side. We've never traveled through a portal yet to Altero Prime because we're still trying to figure out between Matt and I what system we'll use. But I would love to see some of my hilarious dwarf clerics stumble over into the other world and suddenly meet people who've traveled through space.
Or meet your player's future characters that, the player knows who this is, and now they have to play off having never met this person before.
Yeah.
Fun idea though. I like how you can blend in as much of the other science fiction or fantasy that you want. You can that was clever.
As your background in science changed the way that you approach games or the lore that you add, or how has your science background influenced your D&D?
I think having a science background gives you a really firm grasp of the importance of research. I mean, then you might throw a bunch of it out the window once you start playing with your players, but you have a lot to draw on. And so you can always find ways that make everything feel that much more real because it's based in a reality of knowledge and you figured something out. And the example that I like to use is that if you go to a tavern and you order something on the menu, I've probably figured out the menu because I know what the biome they're in is. I know what kind of flora and fauna are outside around that city that people might be hunting or foraging because I figured that out based on Matt did the ocean currents and where the tectonic plates are. And we've done the geology and we've figured out, oh, there's mountains here. The water's going this way. Here's what grows here. And that becomes something that is different everywhere the players go. Because if they travel into a different area, then as things change, we've figured a little bit of that out. And we've done the research to have a foundation that really grounds even the most fantastic moments.
Right on.
That's really fun. I love that.
I mean, that's some deep world building that you're getting into.
The best part about playing with players on your own homebrew world is that they'll fill that out with you as you get to parts that are undiscovered by my current documents. Lots of parts of the world I haven't played in, so I don't know as much about it. And then as soon as a player picks that as their home base or where they'd like to travel to, then you have to be just ahead of them. For anybody who does world building, it's a little scary to let people into your homebrew space, but open yourself up to the possibility that they're going to write stuff better than you might.
Yeah, it's going to be that much better for it regardless, because it doesn't feel as homogenous, because it's all coming from your own brain, but then you start mixing other people's ideas in there.
So you've got all this experience, you've got all this knowledge about production and sciences, but what do you feel like you're learning right now for yourself to develop your own skills in games? What are you excited about right now?
I am really excited to learn more about playing high-level games. So the challenges of high-level NPCs and high-level characters and how to create inspiring games at that level. Because I think the stakes need to be higher and they can't feel artificial, but you have to involve more people, more communities, more nations, maybe even. Because at that sort of a scale, which I haven't played it very much, I'm intimidated by the idea that in my world there would be the gods would be involved. Maybe the players at high level would have access to spells that can literally change the fabric of reality. And that's really scary to me. And how to do that and challenge them. I've been doing a bit of research just on, what that entails, and then talking to other DMs who've run games that have, lasted many sessions at super high level, and trying to get their input on how do you accomplish that when someone can just wish someone dead or alive? How do you do anything at this level and not have it all fall apart instantly?
I'm honestly a little confused by that myself because, yeah, there's so many spells that just, like, if you're trying to craft a story, one person can just change everything with a single spell. And I get where you're coming from. If you've crafted that world over such a long period of time and one spell can erase it, let's be careful, folks. Easy with those wish spells, please.
Well, every DM warns another DM about the inclusion of something like a deck of many things. All of your players are walking decks of many things. Like, they can change anything at any time. Yeah, I can see how that would be pretty anxiety inducing. So I think maybe we have our next marching orders.
Oh, I would love to hear some thoughts from an expert DM who's run a bunch of those games on how do you create a fulfilling, dynamic, high-level campaign.
One more question about your style. What enemy are you throwing in? What monster? What baddie?
Oh, that is a good question. Instead of like a monster, like a wizard or a sorcerer, but something that would be more inclined to have a conversation and make it pretty difficult for the players to just come at them with their weapons.
You're telling me that you would put a puzzle master against the party. I think I get...
I've actually run a one-shot before, forcing players to fight like a version of me. It was all like just unicorns and orcas in the moat and puzzles everywhere, and having to like solve through this adventure to get to the end. And I'm sure they loved it. I have an expression at work where everyone teases me, but I call it mandatory fun. It is literally our jobs to have fun right now.
Oh, and what, again, going back to the top, what a dream job. Ooh, to see my character come alive with all those prosthetics and the team making it all come to life. That's amazing.
And hats off to you and everyone involved in the show. You can check out Ready to Roll. It's out now. It's on its 11th episode. You can find it on YouTube, youtube.com/afilthyquestline.
And don't worry, we'll have links to all of this stuff in the show notes. But yeah, you can check out that first vignette where they have that full scene. I watched it the other day. Very blown away.
It's juicy. It's good. You must go and watch it. They have lots of other content on there too. One-shots, animated monster videos. It's you can get into quite a YouTube wormhole. Then there's also the Filthy Lots Twitch channel, in which they stream plenty of other D&D and gaming content too.
And seriously, this is Jordan talking. Please check this out. Do as much as you can, because I'm going to, because I want to see stuff like this in the world. Like, this is a game changer, and I'm definitely underselling it.
Yeah, I mean, if this is the template for, I wish every, Twitch, podcast, all of these wonderful games that are being played, they would be so much better if this kind of endeavor was something that people more regularly took on, but only the brave take on such a daunting endeavor. And I really wish you and the entire team just the greatest success with this, because it needs to happen more. I hope you become the template for what a tremendous D&D show can be.
Those are such kind words. Thank you so much.
And of course, you can follow Roz herself on Twitter at Squirrels of Doom, and on Twitch, where, Roz, you play Minecraft, Sims 4, Deep Rock Galactic. Is that the headlines?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes a little shooting some zombies and Back for Blood.
Nice.
Good. Zombies gotta die.
That's at twitch.tv/Rue_Zilla.
Thanks to Tabletop Audio for the sound effects you heard in this episode.
You can follow us at Hook and Chance on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Reddit.
You can join an awesome community of players and DMs, trading tips and swapping advice by joining our Discord. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for watching. Listening.
Play great games.
Play great games. I play great games.
That's awesome. We're leaving that.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's great.